Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the best Reddit answers being read to you. Enjoy! What the fastest way you've seen someone ruin their life? I had a friend in college who had a tendency to act before thinking, but was generally fun and well-meaning. After I had graduated, my friend apparently got coerced by a woman he was trying to sleep with to try heroin just once. As I heard it, he refused initially, then caved because he felt pressured. My friend overdosed and died. Just like that, one bad decision ended his life. R.I.P. Mike. I recently found a good friend of mine passed away in my spare bedroom when he came to visit from New Zealand. He had scored some drugs off the street and was doing needles. I was in such shock when he just pulled out the needle and proceeded to do drugs all day. Later in the evening I was sitting on my couch and he said he was cold, so I turned on the heater and closed the door as he was laying in bed. I woke up early the next morning to check on him and he was gone. This whole year has been one hell of a ride. A former acquaintance was playing around with a homemade crossbow that I'd helped him with. I was massively into archery and fletching, and he seemed serious about it. I typically made him leave it with me because deadly weapon. I have an explanation, he kinda didn't. Anyway, to convince his parents to let him join an archery club, he wanted to show off the crossbow we made. I thought it was a decent plan, so let him take it without any ammo. Turns out he was gaming me to get more play time with his favorite toy, had gotten hold of some bolts, and was fricking around shooting his shed a fair bit. He somehow ended up firing a bolt that missed the shed completely, passed between the slats on his fence, and hit his neighbor's daughter in the spine. She hasn't walked since. He got ducked up real bad by her unstable older brother, they both did jail time. Acquaintance was disowned and ended up homeless, and now I'm not sure where they are in life. Went to school with a kid who threw a rock off an overpass and killed a dude. Whole life down the drain at that point. Made international news. Imagine being the dude that got hit. Just living your life driving home from work 1 second and literally dead the next. This life is something else. About 50 years ago, when my great uncle was in his early 20s, he drove home so drunk that he ran over and killed 2 college students and didn't even realize it. After his initial incarceration, he didn't know how to function as a free citizen, so he keeps getting himself sent back to jail. For example, he got out of jail around a year ago and couldn't make his first month's rent. His solution was to walk to the convenience store, steal a beer, and sit on the curb waiting for the cops to arrive. I'm just picturing him getting back into the cell and letting out a sigh of relief, "Gnome sweet home." It's unfortunately a huge problem with prisons, especially when you send in kids for 40 years and let them out in their 50s. I believe the term is being institutionalized. In the Air Force. This new guy joins and goes out to a bar, then decides to drive home. Gets a DUI. Loses all his rank, has to pay a ton in fines, but leadership fought for him and he was allowed to stay in the Air Force. 2 months later, as he's paying tons of lawyer and legal fees, he does something really stupid. Drives home from the same bar drunk and gets arrested. Loses his license and gets kicked out of the military, so loses all his income while he's thousands of dollars in debt. That's not even the worst part. A few months later, he celebrates being a civilian again by, you guessed it, going to the same bar, then driving home drunk. Arrested and put in jail for a while. I can't imagine he has many future career opportunities with a less than honorable discharge and an arrest record. Dropped out of a very good college with a full scholarship, that his family could never have afforded otherwise, after 3 years due to World of Warcraft addiction. No, this wasn't me. I managed my addiction responsibly. I knew someone that happened to too. It was crazy. He was so smart and normal beforehand. The smart doesn't stop. If you looked at their gameplay, they would probably be approaching it with a problem-solving mindset, not an enjoyment one. Smart kids get bored. Bored kids look for engagement. Smart, bored kids look for a difficult game with no real pressure to perform. Hence, wow. Early 90s, my friend was a sweet theater nerd who went to the same college as me. She started hanging out with a sketchy crowd and ignoring her old friends, especially when we tried to tell her she was losing herself. She ended up moving to Seattle to hang with her new friends. Growing up, she was the most sober person in our group. She never even drank alcohol, much less did any drugs, but 6 months later, she was dead of a heroin overdose. One of my best childhood friends also died this way, but a bit more slowly. We hung out nearly every weekend from 2nd grade until 9th. In 9th grade, he really started to struggle with his image, identity. He had always been the class clown, but never really one of the cool kids. One day he showed up decked out in skater gear from PacSun and became friends with some junkies. He started using heroin and I stopped hanging out with him. A couple years later we reconnected. He had convinced everybody that he had beaten the addiction and was moving on with his life. During our college years, I went to a university about 45 minutes away and he started taking classes at a local community college. We would hang out on weekends sometimes whenever I was in town. 7 years later he was still going to the community college and was perpetually 1 or 2 classes away from finally graduating. I ended up joining the Navy. A few years later I got a call that he had died in his sleep after a blood vessel burst in his brain. Apparently long-term heroin use sometimes results in such problems. Doctors discovered he had been using. I had an acquaintance who was pretty successful, early 30s, good job, homeowner, etc. His next-door neighbors had custody of their niece, a 16-year-old cheerleader who was home alone all the time. They struck up a friendship. Need I say more? Actually, yes. The cops stop him randomly with her in the passenger seat. They ID her since she looks young. Call her guardians, who deny that he has permission to take her anywhere. Here's the thing, they had crossed a county line. Boom, kidnapping charge. They break him in interrogation and he admits to sex. Boom, statutory rape charges. They convince him to unlock his phone, and find her nudes in his inbox. Boom, child pornography charges. Boom goes the cell door. I was there when my older brother tried heroin for the first time. Fast forward 15 years and he is constantly going to the hospital for abscesses that appear on his arms and legs and is almost completely cut off from the rest of the family because he's robbed our parents more than once. Every few years he swears he is going to kick the habit. The first few times we collectively ponied up cash to send him to rehab and tried to be as supportive as we could. After the 10th relapse or so we're too exhausted to even pretend to be hopeful about his newest attempt to get clean. Only family would forgive 10 relapses. I had a friend years back, always kind of an odd guy, but he had a good heart. Anyway, one day, I was hanging out with him and a few other friends and he told us he was going to get a tattoo tomorrow and had this super cool idea, but he wouldn't tell us what it was because he wanted it to be a surprise. We saw him about a week later. He had tattooed 3/4S of his face green. Like, no design or anything, just solid dark forest green. Basically, he just left the top right quarter of his face normal and the rest was all green. He had been immediately fired from his job the day after getting the tattoo. I kind of lost touch with him shortly after that, since he moved to another city. I'd heard he wound up living in his car. No idea why he did what he did. He'd had a very good job in IT at a pretty big company and was making decent money. No clue why he thought permanently turning 3/4 of his face green would be super awesome. My boss got caught by a bicycle cop in a shady alley waiting for a friend whose name he didn't know. He was just picking her up for dinner at Arby's with a crack pipe in his console. He was making probably $200K a year. He was a public employee and the news exploded on local news. He was fired and divorced in a matter of days. Waiting for a friend whose name he didn't know. He was just picking her up for dinner at Arby's with a crack pipe in his console. Took me too long to realize that was definitely not what he was doing. Abusing Xanax and alcohol left my life up pretty good pretty quickly, crashed my car, got dumped by my girlfriend, failed all my college classes, and made a bunch of people hate me all in the span of like 2 months. Haven't touched Xanax in years and managed to somewhat pull my life back together. I'm glad for you, keep at it. Xanax and booze absolutely ruined me too. I lost my job, my family and my ability to get the job of my dreams. That was 10 years ago and I'm since clean, and getting my record wiped and restarting. I wish you the best of luck my friend, you can do this. My boss has a saying, you're only one more drink and one stupid comment away from losing your career. That being said, I watched a former coworker pull a beanie toward the crown of his head and say, check it out, I look like Brian's cock. Brian was his uncircumcised subordinate, sitting right across from him. My former coworker was out of a job within a month, divorced within 6, and living on the streets within 3 years. Jesus Christ. Where did those last 2 steps come from? I knew this guy in my 20s. He was kind of new to our little group. He brought this girl around. She was trying to duck everybody. I didn't know him that well, but I tried to tell him about her. He didn't believe me and took her side. We stopped talking. When she was trying to F me one night, she told me he had a premature ejaculation problem and he was really lame in bed. She specified she really needed some good dick because he seriously only lasts like a minute. I wasn't interested in her and politely declined. Anyway, I didn't actually see it, but a few months later, I heard he got her pregnant. The fastest I know of someone ruining their life was about a minute. Hey, there's a good chance it was someone else who got her pregnant. After my baby sister committed suicide, it only took my mom a year to entirely destroy her liver with alcohol and prescription drugs. That must be so hard for you. It was very hard. Mom ended up passing away due to malpractice reasons. She had quit drinking, and was trying to do away with all the fluid buildup in her legs, bloating caused by the dead liver. So a doctor prescribed her something to help pee out all the retained liquid. However, it didn't click in Dr's head that her liver was gone, so her kidneys got overwhelmed by the sudden fluid amount and they shut down. After that, all her body just started failing. Her red blood cells were breaking down, and she wasn't producing new ones. And it wasn't just her legs that were retaining fluid, her lungs were filling up with it too. She blamed bronchitis for the reason that she couldn't breathe properly. But anyway, yes, it was hard. But it's been 2 years now and I'm happy again. I feel good for the first time in a long time. Less than 24 hours. My ex-neighbor's ex-girlfriend went on a racist road rage rant that got filmed. It went viral on Twitter. I remember reading the news article and thinking about her for some reason. She wasn't named. It wasn't until months later that I found out it was her. She was fired from her $300,000 a year job next day and immediately started getting death threats. She had to move in with her boyfriend. She tried getting a job, but people would look her up and be like, WTF. She spent $10,000 on a reputation defender, changed her name, was shunned by many family and friends. Her boyfriend, who she wanted to marry, broke up with her because he couldn't stand the months of depression. She ended up leaving the state. What would have been your answer or question? Leave it in the comments below. Slap that like and subscribe button for more, and check out the link in the video description for even more answers. Peace out, and catch you in the next video.